I never thought staying at my best friend's house would feel like this. She was sitting there, calm, confident, close enough that I could feel her presence. Every laugh, every word, every subtle glance made my chest tighten. And then she whispered, "Don't pretend you don't feel this." My heart skipped, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about boundaries didn't matter. The doorbell echoed softly through the quiet neighborhood, and I shifted my weight nervously, trying to shake the mix of excitement and guilt bubbling inside me. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed over at my best friend's house, but tonight felt different. There was a tension I couldn't name, one that lingered in my chest like a quiet pulse. Maybe it was the way I knew his mom would be around, that subtle energy she always carried, confident yet somehow comforting. When the door opened, she was there, standing in the hallway with that calm, welcoming smile that always seemed to put people at ease. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the warm glow of the porch light. She wore a simple, elegant sweater that made her look effortlessly graceful. I immediately noticed the faint, sweet scent of her perfume, floral, not overpowering, just enough to linger in the air and somehow make my stomach tighten. "Hey," she said softly, and there was a warmth in her tone that made my voice catch. I mumbled a greeting, suddenly aware of how clumsy my movements felt. As I stepped inside, the house greeted me with familiar smells, fresh-baked cookies, the faint scent of polished wood, and the soft hum of a ceiling fan. Everything about it felt safe, yet the presence of her made it electric, like the air was charged in subtle ways I wasn't used to. I followed her into the living room, where the furniture was arranged perfectly, inviting, homey, yet there was a sense of order and poise that reflected her personality. She offered me a pillow for the couch and a towel for the bathroom, her fingers brushing mine lightly as she handed them over. The contact was brief, casual, but it sent a jolt through me I wasn't expecting. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. She glanced at me with a soft, knowing look, as if she could see straight into my thoughts. I caught myself holding her gaze a second too long before looking away, suddenly aware of my own awareness. There was something unspoken in the way she moved, a quiet elegance, a confidence tempered with warmth. Even the way she shifted her weight while talking, leaning slightly forward as she spoke, made her feel close, yet respectful. I tried to distract myself by setting down my bag, noticing how her presence seemed to fill the room without effort. I caught the way she smiled when I fumbled slightly with the couch blanket, the gentle tilt of her head, and the soft sparkle in her eyes when she laughed at something small I said. Every gesture felt deliberate, yet natural, drawing me in without me realizing it. As I settled in, a small, nervous part of me recognized the tension in the air, a silent pull I wasn't supposed to feel. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking everything. But as I glanced up and she returned my look with that quiet, unspoken understanding, I knew this evening wouldn't be like any other sleepover. Something subtle, something electric, had begun. And I wasn't sure if I wanted it to end. The evening settled in softly, the golden glow of the living room lamps casting warm shadows across the walls. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on the game console in front of me, but it was impossible to ignore her presence nearby. She moved through the room with that same quiet confidence, tidying a few things, rearranging cushions, her motions effortless but strangely mesmerizing. Every subtle gesture seemed to carry a rhythm I couldn't quite place, a calm certainty that made the air feel thicker somehow, more intimate. She came to sit on the other end of the couch, a few feet away, ostensibly to fold a blanket but casually close enough that our shoulders were almost in line. I felt the heat rise in my chest, though I told myself it was nothing. Still, every small sound, the soft rustle of fabric, the click of her heels on the hardwood floor, even the slight creak of the couch, drew my attention like a magnet. We talked about trivial things at first, the weather, a movie we'd both seen, something my best friend had said earlier. Her voice was soft, low, slightly teasing, carrying warmth that made me lean in just a fraction closer without realizing. And then there was the laughter, quiet, genuine, the kind that made the room feel smaller, cozier, as if it existed just for the two of us. My fingers brushed the controller, my eyes unintentionally flicking toward her hand as it rested lightly on the edge of the blanket. The accidental touch made my heart jump, even though it was nothing more than passing contact. She noticed it too. I could tell by the slight tilt of her head, the softening of her eyes, the way her smile deepened for just a moment longer than normal. There was an unspoken dialogue between us in those seconds, curiosity, warmth, a subtle recognition of mutual awareness. And yet, she never overstepped. Every gesture was deliberate in its restraint, almost teasing, letting the tension build without breaking boundaries. As we continued to talk, I felt more aware of the space we shared. The faint scent of her perfume drifted toward me whenever she shifted slightly. I caught the quiet brush of her hand against mine when she leaned forward, a fleeting touch that lingered in my mind long after it happened. I realized I was acutely aware of her posture, the way she crossed her legs, the gentle tilt of her shoulders as she leaned in to listen. Every movement was magnetic, yet entirely innocent. The room around us faded slightly. The sound of the TV, the ticking clock, even the distant hum of the refrigerator became background noise to the tension quietly growing between us. I caught myself wondering what it would feel like to just lean a little closer, to meet her gaze without hesitation. But the moment passed as soon as it came, leaving a bittersweet ache in its wake, a reminder that there were rules, boundaries, and consequences I couldn't ignore. By the end of the evening, it wasn't just a casual sleepover anymore. Something had shifted, subtle, fragile, but undeniably there. A quiet connection had formed, built not on words, but on proximity, laughter, fleeting touches, and the magnetic pull of her presence. And as I settled into the couch for the night, I realized I was both terrified and strangely exhilarated by the fact that this was only the beginning. The night deepened, and the hum of the house became quieter, softer. Outside, the occasional sound of leaves brushing against the window or a distant car passing reminded me the world beyond this room existed, but in here, time felt suspended. She had settled herself on the couch near me, a blanket draped loosely over her lap, and the warmth of her presence seemed to fill the space in a way that made everything else fade. We had started talking about trivial things again, but slowly the conversation shifted. It began with small confessions, a childhood memory, a guilty pleasure, a fleeting embarrassment. And then, subtly, the walls I had built around my feelings started to crumble. I found myself sharing things I wouldn't normally tell anyone, not even my best friend. And with every word, she listened, really listened, her gaze never leaving mine, soft but steady, patient but curious. Her presence was grounding. Even the smallest gestures carried weight, the way her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, the soft sigh she let out when I said something that made her smile, or the subtle lean forward when she nodded in understanding. I felt acutely aware of her proximity, the warmth radiating from her side as she shifted slightly closer. Every laugh, every pause, every subtle glance between us seemed magnified, charged with an intimacy that felt electric yet entirely innocent. At one point, our knees nearly touched. I froze for a moment, heart hammering in my chest. She noticed, of course, how could she not? But she didn't move away. Instead, she adjusted the blanket with a small, casual motion, and I felt a brief, fleeting brush of her hand against mine. My mind raced, yet the moment remained entirely safe, entirely gentle. There was a vulnerability in that contact, an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension that hung in the air. We laughed at silly jokes, but there were pauses too, the kind where silence speaks louder than words. I could feel her presence in a way I hadn't before, a combination of comfort, allure, and an unspoken invitation to lean into the moment without crossing lines. And when I looked at her, really looked, I noticed the quiet confidence beneath her warmth, the softness in her eyes that hinted at her own hidden layers. It made me want to understand her, to be closer, to share more, and yet, the awareness of boundaries kept me frozen in that delicious tension. By the time the evening drew on, the casual sleepover had transformed. The room felt smaller, the world outside more distant. Every gesture, every laugh, every subtle glance had added weight, building a fragile, invisible bridge between us. I realized that I was not just aware of her, I was drawn to her. Not in a reckless way, but in a quiet, consuming curiosity that made my chest ache. As I glanced at her one last time before leaning back into the couch, a thought struck me. This wasn't just about a simple sleepover anymore. Something had shifted, a subtle, delicate understanding, a quiet connection that neither of us could name but both of us felt. And deep down, I knew the night was far from over. The house had quieted almost completely. My best friend was already asleep in the guest room, the soft rise and fall of his breathing just audible through the slightly ajar door. The living room felt warmer than usual, filled with the glow of a single lamp and the faint shadows it cast on the walls. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, the subtle rustle of the blanket, the soft ticking of the clock, the quiet settling of the house itself. She sat beside me on the couch, closer than before. Not too close to cross boundaries, but close enough that I could feel her warmth radiating, subtle yet undeniable. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly, but the screen was pointless. My attention kept drifting back to her, the way she leaned slightly forward, the calm, measured movements of her hands as she adjusted the blanket, the soft hum of her presence around me. And then she spoke. Not loud, not teasing, not playful, just quiet, almost a breath. Don't pretend you don't feel this. Her words hit me like a jolt I didn't know I was waiting for. I froze, phone in hand, unable to move or respond. The sound of her voice was closer than I expected, low and intimate, almost brushing my ear with its warmth. It wasn't a command, it wasn't a question, it was an observation, one that cut through all the walls I had built around my feelings. My chest tightened. My heartbeat felt too loud, echoing in my ears. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it was impossible, inappropriate, nothing more than imagination. But the truth was undeniable, I did feel it. The subtle pull I had ignored, the fascination, the warmth, the quiet curiosity, it was all there, now illuminated by her words. I looked at her, and she met my gaze steadily. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the tension that had been growing between us for hours. The small distance between us felt charged, like the air itself was holding its breath. Every detail seemed magnified, the faint scent of her perfume, soft and comforting, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled, the warm light painting her features in soft, golden tones. Our hands brushed briefly as she adjusted the blanket again. The touch was fleeting, casual, but it left a ripple of awareness that ran through me. It was innocent, yet electric. The silence that followed was heavy in the best way, full of things neither of us said, full of curiosity, desire, and the thrill of something unspoken. I realized, in that moment, that everything had changed. The evening had shifted from casual familiarity to something more fragile, more intense. There was a tension now, a quiet question hovering between us that neither dared to answer aloud. And yet, her presence beside me, calm and patient, offered a strange comfort, a promise that this moment, delicate as it was, could exist safely. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, aware that my thoughts were scattered, my heart racing. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and leaned back, giving me space while still remaining close. The message was clear, she knew, she saw, and she was letting me feel it without forcing anything. In that quiet living room, with the night pressing softly against the windows, I understood something profoundly simple. Boundaries could exist alongside attraction, tension could coexist with warmth, and sometimes, a whisper was all it took to make the unspoken undeniable. The night seemed to stretch on in slow motion, the kind of time where every heartbeat is audible and every movement feels magnified. I was acutely aware of her presence beside me on the couch, the subtle warmth radiating from her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the quiet air. She didn't press, didn't lean in or demand attention, but her proximity was enough to make my chest tighten, to make every thought feel heavier than it should. I shifted slightly, trying to appear casual, but even the smallest motion made me hyper-aware of her. When she adjusted the blanket over both our laps, our hands brushed. It was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a ripple through me I couldn't ignore. I wanted to pull away, to regain composure, but some part of me hesitated, reluctant to break the fragile tension that had formed between us. We talked in low voices, the conversation flowing gently between laughter and quiet reflection. She asked questions about my life, my hopes, my fears, each one carrying a subtle attentiveness that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. I found myself opening up more than I expected, words spilling from me that I had kept hidden, and she listened with that calm, patient presence that seemed to validate everything I felt. At one point, I realized I had been staring at her hands, the graceful curve of her fingers as she rested them on the blanket, the gentle way she moved them when gesturing. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to reach out, to let my hand linger near hers, and immediately scolded myself. Boundaries. She was my best friend's mother. The thought should have been enough to make me pull back entirely. Yet, the emotional push and pull were irresistible. She noticed my hesitation, of course, how could she not? Her eyes softened, just slightly, in that way that made me feel understood without words. She leaned back a little, giving me space, yet remained close enough that I could feel her warmth. That subtle push and pull, presence and distance, invitation and restraint, left me tangled in my own thoughts, caught between desire and propriety. Every laugh, every glance, every minor gesture felt charged now. The way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the soft exhale when she laughed at something small I said, the quiet glance toward me when she thought I wasn't noticing, it all added weight to the tension in the room. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the invisible gap between us, but I also feared crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My mind spun with what-ifs and should-is, but her calm presence offered reassurance. She didn't need to speak to communicate that this moment was safe, that the tension could exist without being dangerous. And so, I sat there, torn, every nerve alive with awareness, every heartbeat echoing the unspoken pull between us. By the end of the night, I realized something profound: hesitation could be just as powerful as action. The emotional push she offered, combined with my own restraint, created a delicate balance, fragile, electric, and intoxicating. I didn't know what the night would bring next, but I knew one thing clearly: I was completely, irrevocably aware of her, and I couldn't ignore it. By now, the night had settled into a rhythm of soft shadows and muted light. The single lamp in the living room cast a golden glow across the space, painting the edges of the furniture in warmth. Outside, the world was hushed, the occasional distant car or rustle of leaves reminding me that life continued beyond these walls. But inside, it felt like time had slowed, as if the house, the quiet, and her presence had created a small universe of its own. She shifted slightly, leaning back against the couch with a casual grace, and I noticed the faint curve of her shoulder as it brushed against mine. I froze for a second, heart racing, aware of the small but potent electricity that seemed to pass between us. Every subtle movement carried meaning: the way her fingers lightly traced the edge of the blanket, the quiet hum she made when laughing at something trivial, the gentle tilt of her head when listening to me speak. It was as though every gesture invited attention without forcing it. The conversation drifted from small talk to something deeper, more intimate. She asked about my dreams, my fears, the moments I'd regretted or cherished. I spoke more freely than I had in a long time, and she listened with an attentiveness that made me feel truly seen. There was no judgment, only warmth and understanding. Her presence was grounding, almost magnetic, a mix of comfort and subtle allure that left me aware of her in every sense. At one point, our hands brushed again, lightly, casually, when she reached for her cup of tea. The contact was fleeting but enough to make my stomach flutter. I wanted to linger in that warmth, to let my hand rest near hers, but I held back, aware of the fragile balance that existed between us. It was a delicate dance, closeness and restraint, invitation and hesitation, and neither of us seemed willing to break the rhythm. The silence between our words became as meaningful as the conversation itself. In those quiet moments, I noticed the softness of her gaze, the subtle curve of her lips when she smiled, the gentle way she exhaled and settled into the couch. Every glance, every small movement, every unspoken cue seemed to speak volumes, conveying trust, curiosity, and something unnameable. It was a connection that didn't need words to exist, a silent understanding that had quietly grown over the course of the evening. She laughed softly at something I said, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a quiet happiness that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with being understood. I realized that the attraction I felt was no longer just tension, it had become something richer, more nuanced, an appreciation of her confidence, her warmth, her ability to make me feel at ease while keeping me on my toes. As the night deepened, I felt a sense of calm and clarity. The pull between us remained, but it was no longer frantic or uncertain. It was a quiet, mutual understanding, a delicate bond that existed in shared glances, fleeting touches, and honest conversation. In that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, the connection we had formed tonight would linger, subtle but enduring, shaping the way I felt and thought in ways I couldn't yet fully name. Morning light spilled softly through the half-open blinds, casting warm, golden streaks across the living room. The house felt quiet in a different way than the night, softer, calmer, more open. I could hear the faint clatter of breakfast being prepared in the kitchen and the subtle hum of the ceiling fan above. For a moment, everything felt suspended between what had been and what was to come. She was still sitting on the couch, her posture relaxed, a gentle smile playing across her lips as she noticed I was awake. Her hair caught the sunlight in soft highlights, and her eyes had a warmth in them that made my chest ache with unspoken emotion. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just the quiet, intimate understanding that had been building between us for hours. We didn't speak immediately. Instead, we shared a small, silent moment, the kind that carried weight beyond words. I could feel her warmth even in the gentle space between us, and I realized that the pull I had felt all night was no longer just about curiosity or temptation. It was about connection, trust, and the quiet thrill of being seen. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and calm. "You slept well." It was casual, almost teasing, but her gaze held a knowing softness. I smiled, and for a second, the room seemed to shrink to just the two of us. "Yeah," I said, my voice catching slightly. "I did. Better than I expected." She chuckled softly, a sound that lingered warmly in the quiet room, and adjusted the blanket over her lap again. There was a tenderness in the motion, a subtle acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us without ever needing to name it. I noticed how natural it felt to be near her now, a comfort wrapped in the awareness of everything unspoken. We talked briefly, in small, gentle exchanges about breakfast, plans for the day, and my best friend sleeping peacefully in the other room. But even in the simplicity of mundane conversation, there was a weightless closeness, an unshakable understanding. Every glance, every laugh, every casual gesture carried the memory of the night, of quiet touches, shared stories, and fleeting moments that had drawn us together without forcing anything. When it was time for me to leave, I hesitated at the doorway, reluctant to break the delicate rhythm of the moment. She stood and gave me a small, reassuring smile. Our hands brushed lightly as she waved goodbye, the contact brief but full of meaning. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a sense of calm clarity. The attraction, the tension, the quiet intimacy, it had resolved not in a single dramatic act, but in trust, understanding, and mutual respect. As I walked away from the house, the sunlight warming my back, I realized the impact of the night would linger. It had changed something subtle in me, the way I noticed warmth, patience, and quiet confidence in others, the way I valued deep connection over fleeting impulses. And while nothing had been rushed or forced, the bond we had formed would stay with me, gentle but undeniable. In the end, it wasn't about crossing lines. It was about understanding, about shared moments, and about the quiet realization that some connections are profound enough to leave their mark, even in their restraint. Watch as the tension builds, gestures speak louder than words, and an unforgettable bond is formed, all in a story that explores emotional intimacy, subtle romance, and the slow burn of feelings too powerful to deny.